I studied entrepreneurship with a co-major in technology management. So my counselor was
Studied
like,
entrepreneur. That's ironic. I
cool
was
with
going
my
to say, how do you go apply for a job as an entrepreneur, right? So
don't,
what's the intention after you get the degree?
I was getting paid just under 70 grand a year as a 22-year-old with virtually no skills who had no debt and lived at home the first year. So I had no bills, I had no debt. You would think I was living the dream. But fast forward, I hit week 6, Travis, which is not very long, okay?
You're a quick learner. You're just such a quick study. It took me a decade to. Actually, I was miserable right away, but it took me a decade to figure out my escape plan. So bring me back. So you're at week 6 and you already identified. Okay, this whole work thing's not for me.
I was all in for about $3,500. Ended up selling it really quickly because this was COVID times when things flew off the shelf, right?
Everybody's a genius as an acquisitionist and dispositionist, right?
Totally, man. It was easy to buy. It was really easy to sell. So I sold it for $15,000 and then went back.
At least looking at net 10K profit.
Yep, in a very short amount of time. With a lot of entrepreneurs, you really just need the confidence to take the next step a lot of times, right? And so this story is so funny because is it okay if I share the story on this deal?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So
hey, everybody, welcome to the King Show. You're in for another treat today. I've got a guest who's not just a colleague or a peer. He's a friend. And man, this guy's, if you could buy stock in this guy, I would tell you buy stock because he's got a bright future. And I could tell that right away when I met him years ago. And I've kind of watched him ascend and grow personally, professionally, and start and grow additional businesses beyond the original one. And I'm, happy to play the role that I did in that, the small role that I did. And what our guest does today, he's a land investor who, in addition to running a highly profitable, highly successful land flipping business, he also teaches others how to really convert deals. We'll get into that as the show gets started. But let me just bring him on. Hey. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you. Why don't you introduce yourself to the world and let everybody know who you are?
That was an awesome introduction, Travis. Thank you so much, man. It's been an honor getting to know you the past couple of years, and being introduced as your friend is really cool. Because if you didn't know, Travis was my mentor for a long time, and I'm sure we'll get into that later in the episode. But what's up, everybody? If you don't know me, my name's Ajay Sharma. I've been doing land for just over 4 years now, going on 5. In that time, have tested out a bunch of different plays in the playbook. I'm using Travis's verbiage here if you haven't heard him talk about it.
Oh, hang on. We got to do the Wayne's World, insert marketing.
Oh!
All right, go ahead.
There it is. But yeah, no, you've championed, I think, bringing in that sports terminology into land, right? Plays in the playbook. What are the different strategies we can use? And so I've had the honor of doing all different types of deals, shapes and sizes, entitlements, minor splits, flips, wholesale, double close, some portfolio stuff that's a lot smaller than some of the stuff you teach, but a little bit of everything: hunting tracks, desert squares, rural rec, infill, so we've touched a lot of different stuff in the past few years. Proud to say we've scaled up team up to 7, not including me and my business partner, Ben. And since then scaled down a little bit, actually, where we've got a staff of 3 now, all stateside. And we're doing some interesting types of deals, some creative ones right now that I'm happy to chat about a little bit later, but we're loving life and loving business, Travis.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, you're loving business, but you are also loving life because we text, I don't know what it was, a month or so ago, but I texted you one week and you said, hey, I'll have my assistant get back to you. I'm on a cruise in the Bahamas, okay? And then I text you a week later and you said, I'm at the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul fight. And I said, okay, this guy's having way too much fun. Like, you're supposed to just be in a cubicle behind a computer, slaving away in your 20s, right? But you're actually fitting in some life, right? In addition to your land business.
Man. I am not afraid to both work while traveling and just get some good travel in. Like, my wife and I, we probably do 1 or 2 international trips a year and a bunch of domestic ones. I'm a big fan of workcations where we plop down. I've got friends all over the country, so we'll fly to a friend's house for a week or 2 and work remotely out of there. Places in Florida, I'm coming to your neck of the woods here
Yep.
soon, and I'll be in Scottsdale. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of the workcations, man. Go around. My wife likes to sleep in. She's not a morning person like I am. So even on those, sometimes I'll wake up at 5 and work until 9 o'clock when she gets up. And then, man, I don't know about you, but I can get a whole workday in 4 hours. You know,
Oh,
what takes a
yeah.
lot of people 8, 10,
Well,
12 hours. I can get a bunch of work done in
well,
4 hours.
that's because when you've been in the work environment, if we subtract out the commute, we subtract out the mandatory 1 hour lunch hour, we
Yep.
subtract out the interruptions where people walking into your office bringing you their problems or asking your opinion, the water cooler conversation, right? If we get rid of that, come on, we're only looking at 4 or 5 hours of real work a day. So yeah, I agree. Like in the entrepreneurial world, like if like a focused Cal Newport deep work 4 hours, we're getting a lot done, and that's interesting. Yeah, that's the kind of balance I've kind of come on board to that camp of the 5 a.m. club and waking up early, but it wasn't natural for me. I was the night owl, and my wife was the
Oh,
morning person.
okay.
So when we met, she would way back when we met, she was getting up at 4:45 back then. Okay. And that's just what she did. And I was staying up, till 1 a.m. So for me, when I started the land business, I was staying up late to get my stuff done after everybody was in bed. And then later I ended up staying up late and getting up early just to get done what we needed to. But that's good. You guys have some, some contrast there, right? Where you can kind of get up, get stuff done, and it doesn't intrude upon, right, personal life, because that's the biggest challenge, right? Is
Definitely.
I got to manufacture time. I got to like not have this thing take over or infiltrate the quality of my personal life. So I'm happy that you can still fit in goofing off at Mike Tyson fights and cruises and stuff, and still be profitable enough to do that. So before you were living the dream, bring us back to when you were freshly graduated. Because if you're just listening to the audio, you can't appreciate this. If you're watching YouTube, you're going to look at Ajay and you're going to go, this is a young kid. This is a young cat, right? Like, how is this guy doing what he does at this age? So bring us back to before you started land 4 or 5 years ago, like fresh out of college, working a job. How did you identify outside of the day job that you wanted to start and do something? What were you doing as a W-2 job at the time?
Yeah, so it almost starts back when I was a kid, because I grew up by no means wealthy. We were very poor as a kid, Section 8 food stamps, really young. And then by the time I was a teenager, we were about middle class. And so, we did fine. I remember I really felt rich when we hit middle class for the first time, when I got more than one pair of shoes in a year. That's a big
Yeah.
one for me. Like, I remember as a kid, it's like you get one pair of shoes, and those are your sports shoes, those are your school shoes, those are your church shoes, that's your everything shoes, right?
Yeah.
So we couldn't afford anything else, right? And kids grow fast and they grow out of stuff. And so I think it was seventh grade was the first time I got more than one pair of shoes. And I was like, man, I'm
We've
rich.
made it. We've made it. Yeah.
Right? So, and the reason I bring that up is my family, we owned a gas station in Southern Indiana. And anybody that's grown up with any type of family business knows that means you're working the business as
You
a kid.
work. You work. Yeah.
And you're
Everybody works.
unpaid, right? Dinner on the table as you getting paid, which is, it taught me a lot of lessons. But when I was young, man, I was exposed to these really cool lessons. Like, I'll never forget, we had this guy, Dave, who used to come, and he would work for us for a couple hours on delivery day. We'd get all the candy bars and everything delivered, and we'd need to put all the stuff away, right? So we'd pay him like $8 an hour or something to help us stock these groceries and candy. And I remember at the end of every shift, my mom would have him manually bag bags of ice. We had an ice machine in the back. And I'd be like, Mom, why do you always make Dave do these bags of ice? And she's like, well, son, here's a good lesson for you. It costs us basically nothing to make a bag of ice, and I sell them for $2 a pop, right? And so if I have Dave go back and make 15 bags of ice, we actually get our money back on him working all the other
Right.
hours of the day, assuming we sell the bags of ice, which we always did. Ice sells, And
Yeah.
so it was an early lesson in my brain of like, wait, people can work for you and you make money on it. And like as a 13-year-old, I remember that breaking my brain a little bit.
Leveraging other people. Yeah.
Exactly. But so at a young age, I always was fascinated by being able to control your income at some level. And for more personality context, this is probably more than the audience wants, but I promise it's helpful.
No, it's not. Trust me, it's not.
I'm the youngest son, and typically youngest children are known for fill in the gap for me here, Travis. Not listening, wanting their own way,
Yeah.
being, and I was a
And
very
getting it because
and
by then
getting
the parents have either A, given up, or B, just softened up, right?
Yep, exactly. And so I was just used to getting my way. But I was a very well behaved kid, good grades, stayed in school, didn't get any trouble, no records or anything like that. I don't even have a speeding ticket. Knock on wood, it stays that way. So was always well behaved. But I was used to getting my way. And so fast forward, by college, I knew I was going to be wealthy. I didn't know how, but in my brain, I think everybody thinks this at some point. Some people do and some don't. But I was like, I am going to be very wealthy. And I don't know how yet, but it led me down path of reading books. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, classic one, where I started understanding the difference between, owning assets versus liabilities, things that put money in your pocket. Led me down to real estate. So I'd always been fascinated by real estate from the age of like 19. I
Yeah.
got out of college, started my W-2. For some context, it was peak COVID. So I'm
So
young.
what year is this?
Yeah, this is now 2020 that we're
Okay,
talking.
this is 2020. You get out of what did you go to college for?
I studied entrepreneurship with a co-major in technology management. So my
You
counselor was like,
studied entrepreneur. That's ironic.
it
Okay.
was one of the few colleges in the country that actually had an entrepreneurship program, and it's frequently compared to Babson out in Boston, which is like the one big entrepreneur
I
school
was
with
going to say, how do you go apply for a job as an entrepreneur, right? So
don't.
what's the intention after you get the degree in
Here's the funny part,
entrepreneurship?
man, is they brand it as entrepreneurship and corporate innovation is what they call
Okay.
it. And then I had a co-major in technology management, which was basically information systems. So
Yeah.
I learned a little bit on like the bridge between IT and finance, or excuse me, IT and business to make myself employable, which didn't matter for too long, but it got me a
Yeah.
job in consulting. So I was an IT like project management consultant for $1 billion consulting firm right out of college. The dream for a lot of people.
Right.
It was good, man, in the sense of like tons of work-life balance, tons of flexibility, good enough pay. I was getting paid just under 70 grand a year as a 22-year-old with virtually no skills who had no debt and lived at home the first year. So I had no bills, I had no debt. My car I bought in cash, so it was again, you would think I was living the dream, right? But fast forward, I hit week 6, Travis, which is not very long, okay?
You're
I
such a quick learner. You're just such a quick study. It took me a decade to actually I was miserable right away, but it took me a decade to figure out my escape plan. So bring me back. So you're at week 6 and you already
week
identified,
6.
okay, this whole work thing's not for me.
So here's what happened is I'm at week 6 and I had this boss. Anybody who's been in like consulting understands there's like you move around teams and so you change hierarchies frequently of who you're reporting to. And I had a director gal who oversaw my work who was just not a great communicator. She was one of those gals that would tell you to do something and then wasn't there if you needed support. And then the day before it was due, it was like, why the heck is this not where it needs to be? And I'm like, dude, I pinged her daily. I try to set up meetings. She would always move them. So lo and behold, Friday at 4 p.m., she says, hey, this isn't where it needs to be. I need you to work over the weekend. And I was like, what? I don't want to work over the weekend. This isn't even my fault, right? And so, Travis, it's not that I didn't want to work weekends, man. I'll work as much as I need to. I'm a workaholic. For me, it was the frustration of lack of control, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, because somebody else didn't have the ownership and accountability to do their end of the bargain, I now need to suffer. And that was a disconnect in my brain where I was like, that's not how my life's going to work. That might be how other people's lives work, but that's not how mine's going to work. And so, as a type 7 Enneagram, if anybody's ever studied Enneagram, I have a proclivity to run from pain. And so, I hit a pain threshold very early and very quickly where I was like, I'm not letting anybody else have control over my time or my income. Led me down a rabbit hole. I stumbled into Ari Tipster. Our mutual friend Seth Williams
Yeah.
is an awesome guy. I love him
Well,
to death.
and so many has probably launched or started so many people's careers in real estate. Was that via podcast or how did you come across Seth?
So I stumbled into one of his YouTube videos first.
YouTube. Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it was YouTube was the first contact with Ari Tipster.
Yeah. You're a
It was
young guy. You're a YouTuber, right? You're on
yeah,
YouTube.
yeah,
You're not on the legacy channels, right?
yep, exactly. But YouTube got me over to the
The
podcast.
podcast.
That
Yep.
evening, I went on like a 2 or 3 hour walk because it started hitting, and you get the state of euphoria when something's new, right?
Yeah.
And so I was walking and listening and I was like, this is crazy. Like this niche sounds awesome. So that night, actually, I remember texting my then girlfriend, now wife, and I was like, there's this thing, it's flipping land. Like the course is $1,500. I think I'm going to do it. And she said, do it. And she's super risk adverse. So for
Yeah.
her to say that was like the push I needed to be like, okay. And I bought the course. 3 weeks later, got my first deal. I just followed exactly what it said, sent out some mailers, boom, got a deal. And that was the beginning of my journey.
Yeah. And so that quick action, awareness, quick action. But prior to that was what I want to kind of bold font underscore highlight here is that you said the frustration and lack of control.
Yeah.
Okay. That's articulated well. That's put well, because a lot of people are unhappy with their job, right? And you talk to, I talk to people all day long, and I tell people, I talked to some yesterday, makes 350,000 a year,
Wow.
right? And still want to do their own thing, So sometimes you go, hey, I'm unhappy, I'm unfulfilled, right? And you don't know why. But I think you identified within it why. And for you, it's frustration of lack of control. That was
Yeah.
me, with like frustration with like lack of autonomy, right? Lack being the ability to control my own schedule,
Right.
right? And that was my biggest thing. So that was for you. Then you go, okay, so I want to start learning and looking outside of the job, where you go, okay, I'm looking because I want to go full time, or where you're like, hey, I want to like try to build up a second stream or layer of income so that I could go full time.
So,
What were you thinking at that time?
yeah, it's funny to think back to, Travis, because at that time, my thoughts were there's a low barrier to entry and low risk to make cash quickly.
Yeah.
And every 20 or 30 grand I make in land, I can use to go buy a rental property, is what I thought at the
Yep.
time. And so I was like, man, I'm, 15 deals away from getting 15 house deals
Yeah.
that then give me financial freedom to quit and figure out what I want to do. It's
Yeah.
ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I bought one rental property and man, that thing sucked. It ended up being fine. I sold it a year later. I made almost $50,000 on it. Like it was best case scenario on all fronts. My tenant wasn't too difficult. I had a property manager in there. I cash flowed like $600 a month. Most people on the outside are like, bro, why the heck did you sell that?
Yeah.
But
Like, let's scale this. Yeah.
yeah, right. But Travis, you and I both know, man, if I that extra 50 grand and then the 40 I put into it, that $90,000 I used. Number one, I was getting married the next year, so that stuff's expensive. Number two, though, I funded a couple other people's land deals, which is extremely lucrative, man. As
Yeah.
somebody that you
And
fund way more
passive.
deals
And
than I do.
passive. If you can underwrite it and protect yourself from risk, right? Like, put your money in a good deal. It's a pretty passive way to get an excellent return.
Yeah, if
Right?
you've got cash, you can underwrite, and we understand the asset, which is the
Yeah.
advantage most people don't. Where it's like,
Yeah.
man, if I fund 5 or 10 deals a year out of my own pocket, like that pays my old salary all day long. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
So
So
you've got your job. You kind of become aware. You buy a course. You get the kind of the foundation. You start marketing right away. You get a deal. What's that first deal look like?
yeah, my very first one was it's funny, my first lead ever ended up becoming a home run deal. But
You're
that
not allowed to say that out loud. I tell you that every time you tell me. I'm like, you're gonna get lynched, man.
I know.
People that have got 100 leads in their CRM still working on that first deal do not
Oh
want to
my
hear that
gosh.
you converted your first lead. But that's a good foreshadow. The conversion we'll talk
It
about here
is.
in a minute.
Yeah, right.
So you convert your first lead, and what's that deal look like?
Well, okay, so this was a complex deal. And yeah, I feel like we need to put a disclosure. Past performance does
Yeah,
not indicate future,
right. Exactly.
But my first lead came in. It was a guy, he owned 6 parcels in like rural Wisconsin. And I had like probably 7 grand in my name at this point, Travis.
Yeah.
And so I looked at all 6 parcels, put my finger on the smallest one. It was a half-acre riverfront property. And I said, I'll buy that one. He had about 1,100 in back taxes on it, on just that piece. I agreed with him. I met him in person. Man, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but I almost lost this deal 4 times. This guy told me no and then told me yes. But then I sent him, he didn't have a computer. He didn't have internet. I mean, this
Yeah.
was a rural guy, right? Which you're
Right.
nodding your head because you know and I know that's not an
Yeah.
infrequent thing
That's
in this business, right?
our
um,
demographic sometimes in land is obviously with houses, we could show up at the front door. You can sit there,
totally.
sign the contract at the kitchen table. A lot of times land is very like long extended ownership, which naturally puts them in an older demographic. And some of that means they're not technologically savvy, meaning like no email, right? Or others just that own land are kind of like off grid, type
Yeah,
characters. So you identified one of those as your first
exactly. And
seller.
so I send him a PA in the mail so I can get it into title. And he's like, dude, there's no check in here. And I'm like, I'm not just going to mail you a check with a PA, man. Refuses to sign a purchase agreement.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what do I do? Right. And Travis, this is my first deal. I've got no community. I did not know about the
Yeah.
Facebook groups. I didn't know about coaching programs. I didn't know anything, man. And that's my own fault because I was in the RE Tipster ether. I probably should have just dug a little deeper and I would have found some because they've
Yeah.
got a blog, they've got a Facebook group, and I just didn't know. Right. And so I remember actually texting my wife, again, then girlfriend, and saying, like, hey, I think this one's going to have to die and I'm just going to need to move on to the next one. And she was like, it's your first deal, push harder, which again is just such a
Yeah.
testament to like God put the right woman in my life. But I was like, okay, Hail Mary. I call him and I'm like, hey man, if I show up at your door with $2,000 in cash and a mobile notary, can we get this done? And he's like, well, yeah.
Yeah.
So, man, I get in the car. I'm in a sweater vest and nice khaki pants, because again, I came from college and corporate, and that's what
Right.
you wore. And I drive on out to rural Wisconsin.
This is almost like the start of a scary Craigslist story, right? You're like, he gives you an address, you show
Oh
up,
my
that's
God.
him.
Ended up being the nicest guy, man. Sweet old guy. We got it signed. I was all in for about $3,500. Ended up selling it really quickly because this was COVID times when things flew
Yeah.
off the shelf,
Yeah,
right?
everybody's a genius as an acquisitionist and
Yep.
dispositionist, right? Like, yeah.
Totally, man. It was easy to buy. It was really easy to sell. So I sold it for 15,000 in basically a couple of weeks.
You
And
bought for two, is that what you said?
so I paid him
Or
two,
you
and then
gave
had
him
about
two?
1,100 in back taxes, and there was like an old mattress on there. So I was all in at about 3,500.
Okay.
And yeah, ended up selling it for 15,000 pretty much
Yeah.
right away, and then
So
went
we're
back
at
and
least
sucked up.
looking at net 10K profit,
Yep, in a very
probably.
short amount of time.
Yeah, that's fantastic proof of concept. And I'll tell you, it doesn't matter what income level you're at, anybody, 10K is 10K. All right,
10K, yeah,
$10,000, $10,000. I'll tell you, any level, nobody turns their nose up at $10,000. All right.
totally, man.
So especially though, when you go, okay, if I'm making 70 grand a year, I've got this one deal, I just made 10 grand. You probably do the math on like hours into the deal and go, hey, that's not a bad hourly rate,
Yeah.
right?
And it's
Like,
funny too, man. You get so cocky right away, right? I'm like, here's the worst part, Travis, and I will share this and you're gonna scold me for it. But man, this was on, I think, 60 letters.
yeah.
So this, guys, if you're listening and you have not done a mailer yet, like that
Yeah.
is a terrible, terrible basis in
Sample
terms of,
size, right?
yeah, terrible sample size. I got very lucky.
Yeah. And
For that.
sometimes the land gods front load things for some people, man. And you're one of them, dude. You're one of them that the land gods front loaded for you. I've had
Totally.
others where maybe 14, 15,000 units of direct mail or marketing in and nothing. And then all of a sudden there's this flurry of 3 or 4 deals all at once, right? But
Crazy.
those first, we get somewhere between like 7,000 to 12,000 units of marketing, and people going, are you sure this works, Travis? Right. And then, like I say, bang, that flurries on the back end. But for you, you were fortunate that you were kind of proof of concept. Your deal came early. So after this deal, how many more deals or where were we at when you kind of came into my orbit and found our group coaching program?
Yeah. So this was, gosh, I remember, I think I got my first deal it was like September, October 2020. I signed up for one of your group coaching sessions in February of 21. You were doing a Blue Ocean, Red Ocean promo, big webinar with Jesse Kwong, another mutual friend of
Yeah,
ours from
yeah,
Pebble.
Pebble
Great guy.
REI, yeah, software,
Yep.
yep, absolutely.
And so I tuned into the webinar. I'm not going to say how cheap it was back then because I'm sure prices have gone up.
Yeah,
But
we're not time stamping it. You're going to pay 5 or 10x that now, guys.
which
But
tells you it's only going to get more expensive if you're on the fence. Work with Travis now. The point was just it was super affordable at the time. I'd already seen some level of success, and honestly, Travis, that small sample size ruined me a little bit
yeah,
because I got that first deal, and then it wasn't 4 months until I got my next one because I thought it only took 80 mailers.
it kind of brands into your brain like expectations, right? Are not
Exactly.
set properly because you're the exception, not the
Right.
rule, right?
And
So
so
yeah,
I was so glad I jumped in with you because it just forced me to increase output. I started doing blind offers. And back then, again, conversions were way better, but it was still, hey, a couple thousand mailers and I would get some, high four, low five-figure deal, right? I'd
yeah,
make 12 grand, 15 grand a deal for every 1 or 2 thousand mailers I would send out. And that just got me going that year. So I did 7 or 8 deals and then actually came back for the remaining 5 parcels from my first lead. And that ended up being a home run, man.
you
So
circle back when you had more knowledge, right? And felt more confident in negotiating or taking down. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, and
That
that's what we
was the
do.
big
We do that still. I do that. We do that with large like portfolio owners where
nice.
I was in over my head so many years ago, but now I feel really comfortable or confident. That's something I had a one-on-one client, and he was really good on the phone, really confident guy and comfortable. But he said, "Man, I've done no deals." So what do I say to these people when they ask that? Like, "Hey,
Yeah.
how long have you been doing this?" I said, "Just tell them, like, say, between my partner and I've done over 400 deals and we've been in the industry over 12 years." Now he was 100% leaning on my resume, but as
That's
soon as I
okay.
told him that, he's like, "Oh, yeah, I feel good about that now. Just between my partner and I." And then
Yep.
he was just a closer on the phone, right? Because he felt that confidence. Because early on, you can't really lead the conversation because
Yeah.
you haven't been through enough of them to know and
Yep.
speak from that position of confidence. You're kind of posturing. So you
Oh, yeah.
circle back after you got some experience to close a much bigger deal, right?
Yeah. And it still felt, man, there was still a lot of imposter syndrome. It's funny too,
Yeah,
because I think with a lot of entrepreneurs, you really just need the confidence to take the next step a lot of times,
yeah.
right? And so like this story is so funny because is it okay if I share the story on this
Oh
deal?
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So I was sitting down with my high school best friend and his parents at a lunch back in Indiana, and they mentioned to me, "Hey, we just downsized our house. Ryan was telling us about your land business you've been doing. We've got $130,000. Is there anything you could do with it?" And man, I'm scratching my head because I've only ever done deals that are like buy at 9, sell at 20 to
Yeah,
25. I'm like, what do you even do? Right? My brain hadn't clicked that I could either send out a ton of marketing or bing, 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 this deal that I couldn't take down a year ago.
yeah,
And so, man, this is like, we talk. So before we hit record, Travis, you and I were chit chatting about the level of risk you're willing to take when you're
yeah,
single and you got nothing to lose. I wasn't
yeah,
single; I was unmarried, man. I took some risks here, I'll tell you. So, I at this point had about 20 grand liquid to my name, and I owned, I think, 2 or 3 properties worth maybe 15, 20, $25,000 in that range somewhere, right? So I've got a net worth of, let's call it 80 grand.
yeah,
and and this guy owns this property in rural Wisconsin. It was 114 acres, give or take a few. And he told me he wanted about 1,000 an acre. So I call up the agent that sold the old property, and she was like, "Dude, you can sell that thing for like probably 350, 400 all day long." And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right, got it." And you know what's funny too, man? I even tried to give him realtor contact info previously, and
yeah.
he just didn't trust anyone.
Right.
So I really think,
That I'm gonna like jump in there
please,
because this is where when I converse with people, I'm always trying to through my questions. I'm trying to identify like biases, past biases. Okay, the kind of the discovery call. I always do this, and it's like there's a couple things that people have very strong biases about. One is attorneys, the other is like realtors or agents,
yeah,
because you don't have a whole bunch of like volume or quantity of interactions in most people's life. They have a few, but the few they have really frame their opinion. People
right,
don't buy and sell a lot of houses. Investors do, but most people don't, right?
it's
And
true.
same thing with they don't have a whole bunch of legal, right, cases in their life. So the few they've had of buying and selling a home or land, and the few legal cases really frame their opinion and create a bias,
Like,
positive or negative. So I'm always hunting for that bias, like
yeah, that makes sense.
yeah. And so you found somebody that maybe had a bias towards agents or realtors, and that was a positive for you, right? And that they weren't looking at, they didn't want to go that traditional route.
Exactly, exactly. And so this was super interesting. So he wanted 110. I got it under contract because he trusted that process the second time we did it. And now I'm like, okay, how am I coming up with this money? So it's interesting. I've got my friend's parents that just pitched me, but in my brain at the time, I didn't feel comfortable asking them for 100% of the financing and not giving them equity in the deal. And because of
Yeah.
how juicy this thing was, I wanted to give them, like, I wanted it to be debt
Yeah.
so that I could keep the lion's share of profits. Now, I was still going to give them a fair return, but I'm like, okay, how do I frame this up? And so here's what I did. I had 20 grand liquid to my name. I still had my W-2 at this point, thankfully, because it made me very bankable. So I went out and I got online, did some research on what are the best, easiest, fastest ways to get personal loans. I got a personal loan for 40 or $45,000 like that. And so I called them up and said, "Hey, I just need I think it was 60 grand from you guys. I've got the rest of it. I'm putting up my own liquidity,
Yeah.
regardless of if a
Borrowed
majority."
yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah. Deposited later today at 3 p.m.
Yeah.
I'm putting up a good chunk of my own liquidity. I just need $60,000 from y'all. I'm willing to give you a 20% cash on cash return on your money whenever it sells. Now, the note's going to be for a year. And they're like, "Are you going to personally guarantee it?" And I'm like, "Dude, I don't even know what that means." "Sure, I'll sign whatever." Right?
Yeah,
I'm young.
because you're like, what assets do I have,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine. No worries." And they're like, "Okay, we'll have your attorney send us the doc." I'm like, "My attorney, dude, I'm
Yeah. Google
23." Like,
attorneys now, right?
so then I call up the realtor that sold that old deal. "Hey, do you have an attorney recommendation?" Right?
Mm.
She connects me with somebody. They help me draft up a promissory note. I get it over to them, sign it. We get it all wired out, buy the deal. No joke, Travis, she sticks a sign in the property, man. And we ended up selling it in two chunks. But that day I got an offer 350 cash on the first chunk. And a week later, 100 for the remaining parcel. And so I bought in at 110, sold at 450, man. And that's a life-changing
Oh,
deal.
it is
You know what I mean?
absolutely. Yeah.
After realtor fees, money costs, and everything, I netted somewhere between like 250 and 290. I used to have the number ingrained in my head, and I've slept a few times since then, man. But
Isn't that sad? We really
yeah,
should hold on to that. I'm the same way. It's terrible. There's some people that can recite these numbers. Me, it all blurs together, you know.
yeah,
But that's either well, it's 300, 350, either way, that's a good payday. So, but my guess is immediately, this is how I was anyway. Immediately, I start to look at the salary as like, huh? Like, wait a minute, you're going to tie up 2,080 hours a year of my time, right? And here I
yeah,
made this much over here. So you
yeah,
get this big payday. How does that affect your? Do you give your notice immediately, or
yeah,
what do you
yeah.
do?
Here's what's funny. I didn't actually. I continued to work for I think another 4 or 5 months because Christmas time was coming up. Truthfully, Travis, my job was so easy, man. I got a promotion early because I did such a good job.
Yeah,
They promoted me like a year ahead of my schedule because they were like, "Ajay, you're crushing it. The clients love you." I ended up getting in with a project where, man, no joke, I was working 15 hours a week. I was getting all my work done. I was very honoring to the role that, like, if something came up, I always did it versus prioritizing my business. But I was working remote, so I had
yeah.
time to double
Oh
dip.
yeah, COVID. You mentioned this COVID. You're kind of COVID.
Exactly.
So you did have to give up going in and playing ping pong. I'm kind of like stereotyping because of age and generation here, but
I did have a
you
ping
couldn't
pong.
go in and play ping pong or arcade games at the office, right? You had to work from home, which was really challenging socially. But it allowed you to build and launch your own business during that
Exactly.
time, huh?
Exactly. So,
Well, I
yeah.
think we're all gonna have myself and all the listeners. We're gonna have you buy our lottery tickets because
No,
I'm
you
sensing a lot of positive outcomes early here. So at what point? So you would you say 4 or 5 months later you end up
4 or 5
quitting the
months,
deal?
I think, yeah, the biggest thing for me was I still didn't have deal consistency. And it's funny, I think one of my biggest lessons I learned from coaching with you and a few others was like, man, if you want deal consistency, you need marketing consistency. So
Yeah,
that's what I turned on, man. That was my next wave towards in our one-on-one. I mean, I remember being like, hey man, like I need more deals. And you're like, well, dude, like send out more marketing and maybe even try on some new channels if you need fast, right? Because I'm
right.
sure you remember, I think you share the story sometimes, but mail is great. It's gotten really expensive and the response rates have gone down a lot over the past couple of years, but it works. And but it's also slow. right? So I might send out a batch. I'm not getting calls for 3 weeks. Those calls might come in for a couple months, weeks, whatever. But there's like, I always say there's like 3 bumps with direct mail. You have like the initial bump that's pretty big. And then you've got like a second bump. And then there's like that third bump that's like 4 months out where you get a couple random leads. That's where like the best deals ever come from, is somebody's been sitting on that letter for months or years, and all of a sudden they call you back.
Wow.
But it's slow. And so I remember talking to you and you were like, well, dude, try out this cold caller. And I let a campaign rip like that day and ended up getting 2 deals the
Well,
next day.
and
Right.
yeah, and that's what I'm going to highlight though, is because I'm not kidding. Like, dude, there's no shortage of high quality information or education out there, right? Like, you could jump online and we could both learn how to have a 6-pack in 6 weeks, right? But
No.
are we going to do what it takes to get that 6-pack, right? So information, there's no shortage, right? And sometimes you share information or strategy and people don't take action, right?
Totally.
Like, that was something when after you did group coaching, you said, hey, Travis, I'm going to hire you for one-on-one coaching. We
Totally.
start one-on-one coaching together. And that's what I identified was, I was like, hey man, congratulations on this big deal, but this is not normal.
Right.
Basically meaning like, you can't build a business on this exception or this
Why not?
outlier, right? Yeah.
Are you suffering from small deal syndrome? Struggling to close the big ones? You're not alone. Many investors feel inadequate when stepping up to larger deals, but there's hope for you. Small deal syndrome affects countless land investors, leaving them stuck fishing for minnows in a red ocean. Instead, imagine reeling in the big fish in Travis's blue ocean of big land deals. Introducing Land Boss Coaching, the ultimate solution for land investors ready to achieve big results. Our program helps you overcome hesitation, fear, and limiting beliefs so you can step up to the big leagues with confidence. With Land Boss Coaching, you'll learn to tackle bigger deals confidently. No pills or gimmicks, just proven strategies to help you perform at a higher level. Whether you thrive in a group setting or prefer personalized guidance, Travis King is here to help you unlock the untapped goldmine of flipping big land deals as a blue ocean investor. It's time to make your move. Leave small deal syndrome behind and perform like the land boss you were meant to be. Don't let another small deal leave you or your partner disappointed. Visit travisking.com today to explore our group coaching program or inquire about one-on-one coaching. Remember, the path to bigger deals and greater success is just a click away. Visit travisking.com and start your transformation today.
And like I said, if you tell too many people out loud, man, you're going to get lynched because there's so many people who think so much on marketing and haven't got that deal yet. And what you said to me, I remember this was years ago, but you said half a decade ago or something, or I don't know, 3-4 years ago, but you said, I want to build a consistent, like sustainable business, right? And that's where I said, okay, so we've got to be consistent with the marketing. And then we talked a little bit about your main channel is direct mail, and we talked about the frustrations of like how long it takes to get leads and the cost really. And then I said, well, there's other channels. The reason I don't introduce more than one channel or too many channels early on, because people struggle with one channel. So we don't want to create confusion by saying, hey, you should text, ringless voicemail, cold call, email, mail, right? It's just too much and you're
Yeah.
not ready yet. Until you're good at one thing and scale one thing, you don't need to add others. But I told you just really like brought awareness to third-party cold calling services. And I remember telling you this, like, hey, you could probably in-house internally do this better yourself. But when you're just getting started, rather than hiring a cold caller or learning cold calling, like start out with a third party and see what you do. I tell you that same day you buy a cold calling package, bang, hit go. And then within 48 hours, slack me. And you're like, Travis, I got 2 lots under contract, right? Like this cold calling stuff is amazing. I don't have to wait 2 weeks for the direct mail campaign to hit.
Yep. Yep. Oh man, I remember it like it was yesterday. That was good times.
Well, and it's still, so, and there was 2 things there. So then you didn't stop there. Here's what I like though, is you'll seek out instruction and information from somebody who has more experience than you do in that area. But in addition to that, you look at it and you go, okay, you've introduced me to this. How do I make it my own? Right. And how do I improve upon it and make it work with my business? And like with cold calling, you said, okay, this works to use third party, this used to work vendors. It'll generate some leads quick. using other vendors. But if I really learn this cold calling stuff and bring it in-house, and not just in-house, hire somebody to do it myself, right? I really have, circling back to that, like I have full control, right?
Right.
You have control of the lead generation, and you have control of the conversion. And that's
Right.
where I would applaud you or say it's different than a lot of people, right? They would have said, hey, thanks for sharing this. Either A, not taken action, or B, taken action and continued down that same path forever. But you kind of optimized it, right? And after you used a service for a while, you said, okay, here's what I would do different. Here's how I would bring this in-house. And then what are they doing? Like, where could I improve? And anytime you use contractors, that's what you do, like in the workforce,
Totally.
is you identify what it costs to get it done, separate labor, materials, right? And then you kind of go like, where could I improve upon this if we brought it internally? This is what companies do all the time. When I used to work, that's what we do. We'd hire contractors, companies see what it cost us, line item labor, materials, and then we'd also say, well, like, what are they great at? What are they bad at?
Yeah.
And then go like, if we brought this internal, how would we improve upon it? And I feel like you really did that well
Thank
with
you.
cold calling, and have really championed that channel. And is that your primary channel right now for marketing?
So man, we've we've swung all over. I wish I could tell you, yes, we do some cold calling in-house still, in the sense of when things are slower, it's the best way to just fill in time. Right now, we are I'm always scared to share things that like we've only done some with,
Yeah.
because it's early. But we've been doing some on-market subdivides that have been serving us really,
Yeah.
really well. And we're not afraid to cold call. We locked up an infill lot through a cold call just a few weeks ago. So
Yeah.
we still do it. But I think the longer you're in this business, the longer you realize marketing channels are important. There's pros and cons to every lever you pull. But at the end of the day, and this is a lot of, not to get ahead of ourselves, but a lot of what I talk about when I start teaching converting leads, at the end of the day, like I need a person who owns a property that has put up their hand and said, yes, I would sell. And we can run them through a funnel, and you do enough of those and you do them well, right? You're going to get deals. And so
Well,
like, yeah, go ahead.
and that's the marketing going back to the consistency. Like when I'm coaching somebody, the things I identify as, I'll tell people, like, getting better at something takes time. Okay, self-development, anything you're doing, whether it's working on yourself, or it's in sales, negotiation, real estate, anything, like it takes time, right?
Right.
Self-improvement, health and fitness, anything takes time. So we don't have time. We want deals. We want to capture equity. We want to make money. So we go, okay, I'm going to like ongoing. That's an ongoing project.
Yep.
Me and my self-improvement, self-development is an ongoing thing. But what can I do like more immediate? And for me, the two things are like, you can do more of what's already working, or you can become consistent at what you're already doing.
Right.
Okay, so that's like the consistency, right? Consistency and more are kind of the most immediate things while we work on getting better, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I feel like what I want to share with a lot of people is and this is I'm going to share what I observe that you do well, and then kind of turn it back on you on like, how do you know how to do this at this age? Okay, is I feel like even when you went through group coaching, a lot of people stop at group coaching and they go, okay, well, I've got a lot of instruction here. It's not just a self-paced course. I had the course, but I also had some live Q&A to get questions answered. I got this. I got this figured out. I want to shell out the money for this because people have a cost mentality. I
Right.
know I did. Like I did too, right? I had a cost mentality at a very young age. For you identified like, hey, I'm willing to make that investment in myself and do one-on-one coaching. And here's why I'll share, this is not just like a self-promotion plug for me. You do this in all areas of your life. It's not just land. And with me, you kind of hired me for tactical, but you at the same time, you're concurrently investing and getting coaching on more higher level strategic in business, health, fitness, right? So
Everything.
maybe
Yeah.
just explain to people how, one, why you do that, but two, also like how you recognized at such a young age the value of doing this without viewing everything as like a hard cost, or a cost
Totally.
mentality.
So, man, there's a lot of different ways I can answer this. The first one, I just want to like glorify God, because I do think the Lord has given me a gift of wisdom at a young age. I've had a lot of people compliment me on it, and I'm more than happy to accept the compliment, and I want to point people where it comes from. Not to talk too much about my faith while we're talking about business, but
This is the show for it, man.
yeah,
We're both believers. We share that faith. So
totally.
absolutely. Hey, 100% be yourself, man. I appreciate
I
you
love it.
giving glory.
Yeah, man. So the Lord definitely gave me a gift of wisdom, and because of that, early on, and I told you from a young age, I knew I was going to be wealthy, right? And I knew I wasn't going to learn how to be wealthy from people that weren't, because if they knew how, they would have done it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like going to a fat doctor. You're like, that's not the doctor I want to tell me that I need to go on a
Right.
diet.
You want to go to a fat chef, but you don't want to go to like a fat personal trainer, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so, man, I went deep in podcasts early in my life. And I remember hearing over and over and over again, marketing and mentorships and coaching were an investment, not a cost. And if you viewed them that way, you were going to unlock time, right? So, like Chris Crone, who's a big internet personality, some people love him, some people hate him. He walks through this concept of basically time travel with mentorship and investments. How do I get more or less unlimited return on my investments? How do I run through life as fast as possible? Right.
Yeah.
And I knew if I could just crack this nut in my 20s, I had my 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s to run the world. Right. And so I'm like, man, again, for anybody that's listening that's ever like been broke, been poor, we have nothing to lose, man. Like I've got an okay net worth now as a 26-year-old,
Yeah.
but I could lose it all tomorrow and I'd pick up the phone the next day and my bills are paid. I can promise you that.
And dude, Damon John, Shark Tank, if you know him, right? He wrote a good book called The Power of Broke, and he actually talks about kind of this disadvantage being your advantage, right? When you don't have that. So yeah, you're spot on.
Totally, man. And so I just recognized ego needed to die and money was a tool. Those were two things where I was like, I need to learn from people smarter than me. If you are better than me in some facet of life, your business is bigger, more efficient, you seem happier in some capacity, your family is healthier, right? Like these are 10, and this was something I was attracted to you about, Travis, early on, is you rarely meet strong faith-based men that have priority in family, in fitness, in freedom, and finances, meaning money, right? And
Yeah.
like, man, you're not you haven't done this because you're running, non-for-profit businesses. Your businesses have all made money these past few years, which is why
Yeah.
you're able to talk about this stuff. And so my point is I tried to seek mentors that I either admired in some of those facets or, in your situation, all of them, right?
We're in alignment. We're in alignment, right? So
Exactly. And so, man, it was like, how do I unlock the time machine? Because I can get on YouTube and research land stuff. But guys, there's so much free information out there these days, right? But I think we've all also been exposed to bad information out there these days.
yeah.
And so, inefficiency of working with like a coach or a mentor is especially in the business landscape, things change. Like you and I have sat here and talked about how it's not 2020 and 2021 anymore, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, and
am
to
I,
your credit, like you said, like the good coaching is rarely cheap, and cheap coaching is rarely good.
yeah.
Right? That's the reality of it.
It's reality. Totally.
Right.
Totally. And because of that, there's an advantage of like, man, if I go to a Travis King, right? And I'm like, hey, man, I need coaching. I'm not just getting your brain. You, as a coach, are synthesizing everything you hear from the hundreds of students you've had, right? So you know very quickly if you refer a marketing vendor and they're not performing, you're going to know faster than I'm going to know, right? If there's a state where compliance laws change and somebody gets a lawsuit, you're going to know before I do as an individual. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Information flows through coaches very quickly because of the community aspect. And again, that was something else I was able to learn very quickly where I'm like,
Yeah.
sweet man, this landscape's always changing. I need to, in the least, be in community of people that are facing this. And if I can pay for access to somebody who's a really good synthesizer, I'm going to know what's going on a lot quicker. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense because what I would say, I've paid 25 grand a day to show up and learn from, from some big name people. And sometimes I felt like it was well worth it, maybe even 5 or 10x worth it. Sometimes I felt like it wasn't that worth it, the advice wasn't. But what I learned was in the situations where I go, boy, the advice wasn't worth it. I go, how can I still salvage this and make it worth it? And I realized it's not just the information, right, of the consultant, right, the high level consultant or coach or mentor. I then go, the other value is their network. right?
Right.
Like you're saying, their vendors, their referrals, their folio, right? Their network. So one, I want to leverage both, like when I'm working with somebody, but if I don't feel like the instruction or consulting was there, then rather than go, man, that was a sunk cost or that was a loss, I pivot and go, okay, how can I really leverage, right? That, and I think that's what you recognize, that is that mentors and connected people, nodes, right? Connected people, they can curate things for you, right?
Definitely.
And bring you that you can accelerate your success. And that's what I think a big part of what you've done is you've identified investments in yourself that I don't even know how because it's lifetime. You don't even know how to measure the ROI on investments of yourself, right?
Totally.
I think you've done that really well. And what I would say is kind of like to fast forward, skip ahead. So you did group coaching. We worked one-on-one. You had other coaches you were coaching with, and within this asset class, and then outside of this asset class for bigger picture, other areas of your life. That
Totally.
kind of allowed you, I feel like, to fast track time travel, if you will, through life, right? And to the point where you leave your job, you're running a really profitable land company, you've built a team, right? You're running it as a business. I know, we know, chat, like you run EOS traction, right? Like you're running it as a business. You get so profitable, so good at running your business that you kind of get the same bug I do, where when we get one, there's one feeling to getting a wire, an inbound wire. It feels good, it feels great. Take everybody to Ruth, Chris, Benihana, whatever your style is, right? Whatever, everybody's happy, the family's happy, but like it's transactional.
Yeah.
You help a person. It's anybody who's done any service or anything, right? You like helping somebody is a different feeling.
It is.
Transforming somebody's life, helping them, accelerating their success is a different feeling, right? So you kind of start in parallel here, helping others, and that's what we talked a lot about too. And I said immediately, like, I don't feel this is good for you. This is great. This is a good thing. Let me help you. I want to promote you. I want to kind of give you a platform and talk about this, because right now you identified that there's a lot of people out there that after they get over the hurdle of market selection and then generating leads, the actual problem, the biggest problem that you identified that wasn't being addressed, I think, in the industry, as you said, like people are struggling to convert leads. And for
Totally.
you, that became kind of your superhuman. That's your strength, your biggest strength.
Yeah.
So why don't you kind of share with everybody, because you're going to be getting leads from this, Ajay, for years from now. 5 years from now, people are going to be emailing you and texting you about this episode. So I kind of want to kind of announce and share what you've launched here, the Land Closers Academy. Why don't you talk to people about what Land Closers Academy is, and
Totally.
how you're helping people, how you're transforming people's
Yeah.
lives and business?
Yeah, no, this is so exciting for me because it's super fresh. I found my way into sales kind of on accident. I think, just being somebody who is a talking head in the space, enough people let me onto their podcast that people reach out to me for advice frequently, hey, what's working? I'm naturally someone who gravitates towards sales. I think, Travis, you're somebody that gravitates really well towards marketing, right? You're like really, really good at that stuff. So you can go super deep, man. I honestly, Travis, I get bored talking about marketing, man. Like it's not my passion, which is why I'm so grateful there are people like you in this space, because we need all of it, right?
Well, you can increase the size of the top of the funnel to get more deals, or you can increase your conversion rate. And
Yep.
I would say for me, I default more to increasing the size of that funnel.
Right.
And you focus on being more efficient and increasing that conversion
Yep,
rate.
exactly. You've also done, and not to, man, I'm gassing you up a ton on this, but you've also just done such a good job of pioneering certain strategies to become really effective in your marketing, right? Like with your portfolio takedowns and your minor subdivides and just some of the tools in the tool belt, the plays, the strategies
Yeah.
that you talk about in your book and what you teach and stuff, man, that is another testament to you being a pioneer on the marketing side. You know what I mean? It's like, man, you're literally figuring out how to target stuff in ways nobody else is talking about, right?
Well, and that's we lean in, right? We lean into our area of genius that we enjoy, and then we kind of like shore up or combat the weakness. So for me, even the rapport building is easy, but even with all the books read, all the sales and negotiations, same thing. It was never my love language,
Totally.
right? And just the opposite for you, where you really resonate with that and have grown and made huge strides and quick strides with that. that allow you to convert at a lot higher rate than most people in the industry.
Totally.
I'm guessing consistency is one of the bullet points in here, but how are you converting people? And then and then tell us more about Land Closers Academy, what it is and what you're doing different than
Totally.
others out
So,
there.
so I'm going to first dive into just a lot of the problems I see in most businesses. Okay. So here are the things I see land investors struggle with. And then I'll talk about sort of the solutions and where to view into, right? And I'm going to try, there's only so much we can get into in an hour-long podcast, right? I could talk
Well,
on this stuff for hours and hours,
yeah,
right?
well, and if you want another hour of this, what I would say is if you go to the episode webpage, the show notes webpage, fill out a quick form, we'll give you access to what was a paid mastermind event. And you can see the mastermind that Ajay did on cold calling and on lead conversion. Okay, so if you kind of want to go beyond the show and just talking about it and really get into in the trenches, right? Like another hour, like you're saying here. So, I put in another hour here. They can check out, people can go to the episode webpage and get access to the mastermind that you did about this to go deeper than you can on the podcast.
Totally. I love it. So the problems we're going to be seeing with a lot of investors, number one, getting ghosted by sellers, right? Travis, you ever been ghosted by a seller? Definitely.
Yeah, they disappear. Right. They go stale. They disappear. Yeah.
They do. So sellers ghost you. I get high asking prices from a lot of my leads, right? Or I just have trouble turning, the phone's ringing, right? But I don't have any signed contracts and I can't figure out what the gap is, right? And so what I've done to bring to light what we need to do differently is basically said, okay, I know where all the failure points are, or I can't say all, but I know where most of the failure points are. I can identify them by doing a couple of things, right? With folks that are in Land Closers Academy, number one, I want to be looking at key KPIs that happen in between when I get a phone call and when I get a contract signed, and we manage the relationship between each one. I'll blitz through those really quickly, but I've got leads that come in, net leads, which are people I actually speak with on the phone, right? And it's a property that I would buy. So make sure there's not a gap there in top of funnel. From our net lead, we go to offers. Huge gap between here we see a lot for two main reasons, okay? Number one, people just don't make the offer to a property owner, right? They're like, well, it's worth 100. They wanted 100, so I didn't even offer them 50 grand. I'm like, man,
always make the
right?
offer.
And like you and I know that being in the industry for so long. But man, beginners, I get it. I remember what it was like early on, looking at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, they want 95 for this 100 grand property. Like, I can't do that. So you don't even call them back, right? But that relationship tells me, dude, we got to make offers. You will get deals. I've had deals where a seller wants 60,000, it's worth 30. We buy it for 12. You know what I mean? So like asking price, my favorite analogy is for anyone that's seen The Wolf of Wall Street, not family friendly. That scene.
Not safe for work. Watch alone. Watch alone in the media room after the kids are in bed. But yeah.
Exactly. But it's that scene with Matt McConaughey where like, you know what a fugazi is? It's a fugazi, it's a fugazi, it's a wazi, it's a woozy. And then he does the whistle. That's what asking price is in my mind. It's made up, man. Who cares? It doesn't matter. I'm an investor. Here's what I can pay. Yes or no, right? So anyways, we're going to look at these metrics from there. Another big drop-off point is when we get a verbal from a seller and they don't sign the contract. So there's a bunch of things that go on there. We talk about specific process where I have my folks get contracts signed live. We have scripts for that as to how you do that. How do you do it on the phone to get somebody to sign the agreement? And we never call it a contract with the seller, right? We always call it an agreement because it's softer. That's a Jerry Norton tip there. But anyways, those are the key metrics I'm looking at. And then something a lot of people miss, because Travis, and I know, people come in, hey man, I want to be doing, 3 deals a month at 10 grand a deal. And that's what I need to quit my job. People don't forecast for the fall off. If you're double closing, you're only going to close about 60 to 70% of those deals. If you're flipping from a contract, it's probably closer to 80 because you've got title issues. You find something after, right? It's never going to be 100 unless you're just not doing a very good job.
Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
So I want to be able to forecast. Well, number one, let's look at what's happening now. And then number two, let's go out and forecast so we can build the business to get the goal, right? So that's KPIs. Then we're going to focus on specific tactics to get back on the phone with sellers. So that's setting appointments. That's a big one we do that isn't widely taught in our niche, but is super common in high ticket, is super common in like loans, is super common in financial services, right? And so We use Calendly. We keep it really
Yeah.
simple. You can automate and create workflows to have the sellers get reminders and stuff. But we set booked appointments at every stage of the way. My texter's setting one for my lead manager setting one for my closer. And then all of my calls have specific outcomes. So what I teach is like at a lead management level, which means like my first real phone call, when you're verifying access, utilities, anything I should know about the property. It's like, hey, lead manager, what's your goal for this call? And most of the time, they're not going to know how to answer that, right? And so if you teach a specific outcome, which I'll tell you for us, it's let's get a booked appointment for our closer and we need an asking price out of the seller, right? You're able to take that much further. And so anyways, the point being, how do we get on the phone with them? How do we run them through a machine so we actually have the lead management process? And then last, what are the words you actually say to optimize for getting a deal done, right? Let's walk through scripts, tactics. How do we eliminate objections ahead of time, overcome them when they come? All that type of stuff, man. So anyways, I need to shut up because I know I can go on and on here.
No, go on and on. That's what we're doing. What you're doing is walking people through like either holes in the bucket,
Yeah,
like where are the holes in the bucket, the lead conversion bucket, or if we're thinking linear or talking linear, like where do people drop off on those
yep,
stages, right? You're identifying those and saying, how do we improve that? One, like getting contracts signed live. I think that little hinge swings a big door. Same thing for us when I made that realization of booking the call. That's what we do when we have cold calling, done, or we have live call answering
that's
in
great.
response to direct mail. We have people book a call on a number at a time that's convenient for them and they'll answer. And that was a
Yep,
very slight adjustment for us that, again, really increased reach rate with the seller to call back
yep,
and follow up with them. So you kind of identify those, those drop off points, those holes in the bucket
totally.
in your own business. And then it sounds to me kind of like what you've done is you've systematized it to the point where you kind of go, okay, here's the kind of client journey, the seller journey that we're going to run them through. It's not, and this is what's important for people listening is a lot of times when people get into this, it's best effort. It's like, hey, how much time do I have at lunch or after work to go after this and do this? And you
Right,
can get a deal like Ajay, you can get a couple early deals, but you can't like build a repeatable, sustainable business if you don't have a consistent approach to marketing and to conversion. And that's what you're kind of bringing in is essentially not just scripted, but scripts bring consistency. That's what you're trying to do here is you're bringing in a consistent process that we follow every time,
right.
because if we follow that, we can have a more predictable outcome, right?
Percent.
Which is getting the signed contract. So when did you start? Or what made you start? You're now doing this through Land Closers Academy, where you're helping others, and I'll be routing a lot of students your way because a lot of what I help people do is help them select a market, help them generate a lot of leads, right? We buy a lot of properties together outright, but you do a lot of double closing, which with double closing, you can offer the buyer or the seller more
Right.
because you're not buying it outright. And that also means you're not relying on a funder, a hard money lender, a capital. Okay. So a lot of times for people that are unfamiliar or just haven't used capital partners or funders, typically they want that signed contract at 50% or less of the retail price just to de-risk things for them. And then there's enough to split between the land investor and the funder. Okay.
Yep.
Now, when we double close, we can go much above that 50% mark because we're not actually laying out the capital, right? So that's where I feel like there's a lot of opportunity in us working together, but also for the whole industry, for people that are currently buying outright to actually be double closing that allows them to offer more. And that's a lot of what you're teaching, right? Is conversion and double closing. Is that right in your academy?
Totally. Yep. I would say lead conversion is the biggest one. And we do teach both flipping and double closing. There's some nuances with double closing because now it opens up a dispo conversation. And, I think you're teaching a lot of working with realtors on dispo, right?
Yeah.
So still works with double closing. There's just some nuances. Obviously, I'm not an attorney
Yeah.
and this is legal advice, but
Yeah.
there's ways to do it. You just have to be very mindful because realtors typically get paid off of top line. and your margin is now based on a gap that isn't 50%. So you've got to be a little more tactful in how you structure that. But the short of it is, yes, that's what we drill down on, is how do we optimize? Let me take a step back. My thesis in everything that I teach is, how do I maximize the probability of me doing business with every lead I want to do business with in my pipeline, right? Whether that's by triple dialing them to get them on the phone, setting appointments so I get them on the phone more. That's a big one. We see some people's businesses. If I could just sit with you for 30 minutes, teach you how to triple dial, set appointments, and get contracts signed live, I see businesses 2x on their acquisitions. No additional ad spend, no additional staff, couple of tactics, right? It's not uncommon for folks I work with to get 2 to 3x on their contract signed within 45 days of us working together. So you got to do the work, right? This isn't guaranteed, but if you do the work, I have seen it over and over and over again. In that, if you're really good at what you teach, Travis, if you can do the market selection, if you can bring the leads in, and somebody's just got a gap on the conversion side, man, what a good problem to have from my view, because you've already done all the hard stuff. There's a ton of
absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah.
You've already done that. Man, market selection makes my head spin. So where do we go? And then talking new people through it, right? And then choosing the marketing channel and all that stuff. It's man, once we get a lead that hits a desk, let's talk. That's where I get excited. I'm sure you can feel it as I'm talking, right? A lead's hit a desk. Let's optimize the probability of doing business with that lead.
I absolutely love lead generation, and I love the equity capture on the acquisition side.
Yeah.
Lead conversion, that's your love language, right? Lead conversion,
totally, man.
your love
Super
language.
Cautionary, thankfully.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell people a little bit about, what does it look like if somebody's interested in joining your academy? Are we doing monthly, weekly, bi-weekly calls? What kind of access do they get to you? What's included?
Yep. So if you're looking to join Land Closers Academy at the group level, we meet every single week, and that's a call with me. I'll say eventually, if there's too many people in, we'll add a second call. But for now, it's one call a week. That's with me directly, not somebody on my team. So that is with me. We do Q&A. We do call reviews. That's a big one that people don't realize. Call reviews and role play are really how you need to sales manage with when you and I, business owners, bring on an acquisitions manager. How do I up-level them in their conversations? Man, I need to be listening to their phone calls and doing that stuff. So we meet every single week. You submit your calls to us. I listen to them. I give you feedback. We audit your processes. We go through that stuff. That's every single week. There should be a link to that in the description.
Yeah, we'll have a link on the episode webpage direct to your website. Yep.
Sweet. Yep. So that's the group model. And I do a little bit of one-on-one too. We'll have a link to that as well. That'll be shareable below. But I do a lot less of that. So, it's gotta be the right fit.
Yeah, that's just it. You get to top grade, right? You get to top grade, people have to apply type, but that's always without question the fastest, track, right? For sure. But check out the group coaching academy first. Kind of do the sniff test, make sure this guy's credible and legit. Okay, that's what he did with me. And then if that's the case, then hire him one-on-one. Okay. Man, I'm excited for you. Like I said, if I could buy stock in you, I would. I think you're like Bitcoin when it was at 17,000 a share, right? People should be buying into you now. I think you got a bright future. So I'm happy for you, man. I'm happy for the success, the accelerated success you've had. Although a couple of those early deals might be a little bit luck, at the same time, you went out and got the loans, you got the resources, you connected the dots, you made it happen, and what you've built since isn't luck. Right, is not luck. It just speaks to being intentional and methodically building something out deliberately based on what you learned, right? What you learned from others and learn by doing. As you did this, you're the one that identified, hey, lead conversion is kind of something not being taught or serviced, but it's a big issue, and I think it allows you to carve a niche. Without having much overlap or competition. It's really complementary, I think, to a lot of the gurus and educators in the service. So I think it's going to be well received. I'm happy to promote it. There's only a handful of people or vendors or people where I'll say, hey, go out and buy this, go do this. And I can say that, with your service and what you're offering, that the ROI on investing in what you're doing is incredible. And I think people are really really going to respond well to this. We have a lot of newbies, a lot of beginners, but I also think a ton of like intermediate and even advanced investors that struggle with lead conversion,
Yep.
and really don't have many places to go. So much of the sales training is more built on actual sales versus
Right.
acquisition, right? So
Totally.
and
And
obviously
even in
some of
New
that.
York, a lot of those house wholesalers, they're so used to the sellers being distressed. That's a big
Yeah,
difference in land versus houses. Is man,
yeah,
like I get people that just switched over from houses and they're like, this guy doesn't need to sell. What do I do? And I'm like, here you go.
yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
that's just it there. I've had a couple, some of the feedback I've had is one, it's like usually the houses, they're in a distressed situation, right? So they're emotional. That's, that's good and bad, right? Like with the land, there's not that emotion. We don't have to move them off the land. They're already not occupying it, right? And maybe even they're out of state. So they don't have that emotion, but we also can't go knock on the front door, sit down and sign the contract. So it
Right.
creates these problems of even getting contracts signed when we have a verbal yes.
Right.
Sometimes there's these little nuances, right? But hey, man, yeah, wishing you a lot of success. Why don't you tell people kind of on the personal side too? You just got married this year, big year for you, right? So,
Yep.
you've already got your existing business that's scaling, that's growing. I think like a lot of us, like you, it sounds very similar. You grew the team, and then probably through like AI and web tools and resources, you're able to scale the team down a little
Yep.
bit after growing the team, become more efficient. But on the personal front, even while growing the company, you recently got married, right?
Yeah, man. I just got married in on June 8th, 2024. So I am learning all the ways that I found out I have been very lucky to be so selfish with my time. I've been joking a lot, like, man, I became a full-time entrepreneur at 23. If one of my favorite stories is with a mutual friend, Jaron Barnes. He was in Orlando. I lived in Chicago at the time. It was February. He was like, hey, man, I got an Airbnb and it has an extra room. You want to come down? And that night I was in Orlando. A
Yeah.
lot harder to do that kind of stuff when you're married.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little tougher to get the permission slip signed, but what I love is, like I say, I've got like a built-in accountability coach. Like there is nothing gets not done, not completed. I've got a built-in accountability coach. So, and it sounds
Totally.
like your wife, some of supportive, some of that, like, hey, let's do it, or do it, right? Like take action, do it, close this deal, let's move forward. I love it. So that'll probably be the single biggest, most important decision you made in your life, selecting spouse. And it sounded like you did a good job, man. So
Yeah, I like to
congratulations.
think so. The Lord's definitely blessed me with a good one, man. Like Erin is just, she is phenomenal. Supports me, like believes in me more than I do myself, and pushes me. Honestly, and that's a good partner. I think is a good helper that's going to push you when you need it, but also love you when you need it.
Well, you need it because although not every day we're getting inbound wires and celebrating, sunshine and rainbows. There's a lot of like fear and doubt can creep in, and obviously
Definitely.
economies change, markets shift. There's some good years, some bad years, so you need that, absolutely. So yeah, happy for you, man. Thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate you. Anybody who wants to do a little deeper dive and see the mastermind that Ajay came on and did, just visit the episode webpage, check out the show notes, and you'll get access to what was a paid mastermind where Ajay was able to kind of go a little more tactical and teach some of the stuff that he's talking about. All right. Thanks a lot. Hey, appreciate you, man.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for tuning into The King Show. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Also, don't forget to head over to travisking.com for show notes, resources, bonus content, and more ways to connect with me and the guests that you hear on the show. Remember, greatness is already within you. It's time for you to boss up and claim it. Stop building someone else's empire and start building your own.